David Fistman, who's another epidemiologist, said hearing Dr. Williams speak is like watching somebody shovel fog. But we wanted to get an actual epidemiological perspective to this, because there has to be some answers here as to why BC's containment and recovery seems to be going a whole heck of a lot better than Ontario's. Joining us now to talk about this, we'd like to welcome now to the program Raywat Deonandan, an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa. Professor, good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. I've been talking about this strictly from just a strategic comms perspective, because I find that, kind of fascinating. But in terms of the actual science here, what has British Columbia done differently from Ontario to peg their recovery, so much better than ours here?
Well, first of all, you can't underestimate the power of the communications angle. I mean, I've been talking about that as well. The consistency of messaging has a big part to play in getting people on board and having them do the right thing at the right time. But beyond that, there are several factors explaining why different populations seem to respond differently to this disease. There's the population characteristics of the province. There's luck, there's timing, and there's decisions. So the population characteristics, we have a fairly healthy population in BC. The age distributions are similar to that of Ontario. The province itself in BC, there's one major urban center. The rest of it is rugged outdoors, so those are advantages. The luck aspects have to do with the fact that they had fewer cases early on. Ontario was hit pretty hard early on, and you can't underestimate that. They are a travel hub as much as Toronto is, but the kind of travel is different. We know from the New York data that the plurality of cases arriving in New York came from Europe and not from Asia, and I suspect that was probably the case in Toronto as well. And Vancouver didn't have that kind of travel. And their proximity to the U.S. was not as problematic as Ontario's proximity. We're near the epicenter, which is New York. They're near the West Coast states, which aren't as much of an issue. But the other kinds of the epidemiological approach is interesting. They have clear data. This is very much a data-driven crisis. The epidemiologists and the medical doctors have a role to play, especially early on, but increasingly it's being able to make decisions using up-to-date, accurate, real-time data. And we are really crap at that in Ontario. The data pipelines, as I call them, are clogged all the time. We don't know why it takes so long to get test results from the testing center to the public health unit to the province. We don't know why it takes tests to get back so slowly. We don't know why we're using a portion of our laboratory capacity, at least we were for a long time. BC doesn't seem to have those issues, and I think a big part of that is good medical leadership and a good infrastructure.
So, Professor, you said a lot there that I want to unpack. In terms of the data aspect, is that how can Ontario fix that? Because, I mean, it seems as though we're not necessarily getting any better at this. And from a lot of the experts that we've been speaking to, and I'm sure you'd likely agree, Ontario has had this issue, way before COVID came onto the scene. So it seems like this has been an issue that people have been talking about and have known about, yet for whatever reason, as a province, we've never really fixed it.
That's right. In fact, after SARS, many recommendations were offered, SARS in 2003, and among those recommendations was fix the data stream. And, I was one of those people helping the feds write a memo about this process. And we thought we were on the path to fixing it. We proposed putting together a new IT platform called Panorama, and I lost track of what was going on with Panorama. I think it was explored, then abandoned, or defunded, or something like that. The priority dropped in people's agendas, and that's the problem. When a pandemic wanes, it's no longer seen as something we have to spend money on. Hopefully, this emergency convinces people that we have to continuously invest in the infrastructure so that we are ready to respond when the next one comes. And the next one is coming, probably in our lifetimes. So I see this as, a warm-up for a really big crisis. Believe it or not, this might not be the big crisis.
I've been saying that for some time, Professor, and I kind of sound like a doomsday prepper when I say that.
Well, you're right. I mean, this could have been an influenza virus, which with extreme lethality. Instead, we get a coronavirus with, pretty bad lethality, but it's not the crippling disease it could have been. And one of those is coming one day, especially given our globalized economy, our rapidity of travel, and the way they're all integrated economically and physically. But having said all that, the data issues are real, and we can fix them. And these aren't crises requiring Nobel Prize-winning science to address. These are crises that just need a bit of money, a bit of focus, and a bit of managerial acumen. So that's what we need here in Ontario.
Some of the criticism that I've heard as well here in Ontario as opposed to British Columbia is the fact that there are too many cooks in the kitchen in Ontario. There isn't a clear point person in charge. You have a lot of the messaging that is driven from politicians. It is not being driven by, the actual medical experts or the actual doctors and science eggheads, for lack of a better term. And that has also sort of muddled some of it. What's your take on that?
Well, that's absolutely true. And you see it just in the press conferences. I mean, I'm loath to criticize the people responding to this crisis because they're doing the work for us. However, sometimes you have to criticize them. In the press conferences, you get a separate press conference for the premier, then one for a medical officer, then one for public health. There's too much messaging, and it's unclear if everyone's on the same page. A good example is the change in the testing criteria that came about earlier in the week. A memo was offered from the Ministry of Health to be a testing center saying anyone can come forward if they show any symptom or need a test for work purposes. And yet that same day, people were showing up to testing centers and being turned away because the testing centers had literally not received the memo. So that shows us a lack of hierarchical management control over the streams of information and management that need to occur for this to be done properly. So it's a management crisis, not so much a medical crisis anymore, in my opinion. And that's a good news because it means we can fix management crises. We know how to do that. Hire the right people, fire the wrong people, and spend money. You don't necessarily need to invent a vaccine or a treatment to fix that problem.
Well, Professor, you've got me sitting about 3 feet off my chair with your earlier statement that these are just the like the opening previews in the theater before the main feature. Okay. But to your point, because I am reading this NPR story that says there's mounting evidence suggesting coronavirus is more common and less deadly than it first appeared. What have you been hearing?
There's nothing surprising there. So every infectious disease has a prevalence probably larger than we know about. So we distinguish between two lethality rates, the case fatality rate, the CFR, and the infection fatality rate, the IFR. The case fatality rate is a proportion of known cases who die. That's always going to be high because we don't know about all the cases. The infection fatality rate is a proportion of all the cases, known and unknown, that die. The challenge is always trying to estimate that second number. So in Canada, the case fatality rate is about 7%. Because we only know about the serious cases that come forward to be tested. Mm-hmm. We estimate, though, that it's probably globally somewhere around 1%. We have data coming in from Germany and UK and a big prevalence study in New York suggesting it's somewhere just under 1%. And if the new numbers say it's 0.5%, that's fine, too. I mean, lower is the better. However, keep in mind, a bad season of the flu is 0.1% fatality rate. So we're still 5 times more lethal than the flu. More importantly, this is such an infectious disease that more people will get it, therefore the denominator is bigger, therefore the death toll will be higher. This was one of the messages I think is lost on people is this isn't so much a matter of individual risk. For most of us, our risk is quite small because most of us will recover quite well with mild symptoms and probably not die. It's just that this is so infectious that a lot of people will get it, and so the population risk is high. So we have to start thinking about that more. We're protecting the community and the population, not necessarily ourselves. So it's not surprising that these new studies are showing a lower infection fatality rate. That was always expected. The question is, what does it mean for the massive death toll on the population as a whole?
There you go, Supriya. The professor just explained your K factor there.
Yeah,
your K rate.
Professor, I wanted to ask you about another issue that cropped up this week, and that was when we had a number of local medical officers of health basically announcing that they're going to set for themselves and for their own areas a bunch of database thresholds that are signed off by their own experts and their own expertise, because it's becoming increasingly interesting to watch the debate unfold about how Ontario is going about its reopening. The vast majority of cases are concentrated in the GTA, and yet Ontario is going with what's been referred to as a one-size-fits-all reopening approach. Do you think we should be opening up based on region?
Yes, I do. And there are many reasons for that. One is this is not one epidemic, it's many epidemics. It looks different in every province, and it looks different in every region of every province. And there's something to be said for public buy-in as well. You breed resentment if people in Thunder Bay and Kingston have to stay home because of a crisis happening in Toronto and Peel. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, I understand the Premier's position, which is that people travel between jurisdictions, so you're not containing the virus. But they're not traveling that much, especially now with things being closed and people are afraid to go out. That is not as big of a threat as we might think. I think a safe way of going about it is open regionally, not city-based. So the north and the south are so far apart in Ontario that it's unlikely we're going to have any sort of contamination from travelers from Toronto and going up to Kenora, something like that. So it makes 100% sense in my mind to take a regional approach. We have the data. Use the data. Make this be a data-driven decision-making process. Why are we making decisions? It's sort of like if we're making decisions in Vancouver based upon what's happening in New York. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Right, so,
Professor,
go on.
I was just going to say we've run out the clock, but thank you so much for your insight and your expertise.
Oh, my pleasure.